One might argue that if Eloan Marrow had thought to bar her own door on the night of thresholds, not one thing that followed would have happened. But her door had never had a bar fitted to it, because in 14 years nobody had imagined a reason to fit one, and whose fault was that? The doors of Cairnhollow were the Crown's business. So really thought through properly. The whole affair was his, every part of it. It should also be said that Eloan was not the sort of woman a king made a mistake about. She was quiet-blooded. Her wolf had never risen in her, not at 11, not at 20, not on the worst night of her life, nor the best, and so she carried no scent at all. A wolf passing her in a corridor smelled cold stone and old paper. She had spent 14 years being looked straight through, which was why, on the night everything went wrong, she was the only unwed woman in the palace who was not behind a door. The long gallery held 22 of them, and behind every one stood a daughter of the household in her good dress, with her hands folded. The Alpha King walked the corridor once from the north end, alone, the lamps hooded, so no one could accuse him of choosing with his eyes. Whichever threshold he crossed, he took, and somebody had to write it down. That somebody was Eloan, at the south end, with the ledger open on her forearm and the great seal in her apron pocket, waiting to record a name that would not be hers. Past her sat the 23rd door, her own, which nobody counted, because a quiet-blooded woman was not a candidate for anything. The bell had not rung, the gallery smelled of beeswax and nerves. "They oil the hinges beforehand," said a voice out of the dark beside her. I have often wondered why. She did not startle. Very little startled her. A man had come up the south stair without her hearing it, and he stood back from the last lamp, in a traveler's cloak, with the hood up, which, on a warm night, was vanity or business. So the doors do not announce him. He cannot know which one he is opening. And you think that a fine thing? I think it a coward's device. The cloak shifted. She kept her voice low, because she had held this opinion in her mouth so long it had gone smooth as a river stone. A man walks a dark hall for 100 breaths, and comes out the other end with a wife, and nobody can say he chose wrong, because nobody can say he chose at all. Fate did it. The corridor did it. Very convenient for a king who cannot bring himself to decide anything. The grain stores are 3 parts empty. The garrison has not been paid in full since spring. 4 of the outer holdings send their tithe to House Marrable, now instead of the crown, and I know, because I am the one who writes down what does not arrive. Perhaps no one has told him about the tithes. Then no one is doing his work, and neither is he. Not knowing is the one luxury a king is not allowed. She shut the ledger on her thumb. Every girl behind those doors will tell you she hopes for love. Not one believes it. They hope to be chosen, which is a different animal, and he means to hand the business to a corridor, rather than look one of them in the face and say her name aloud. Would you say it to him? I would say worse to him, said Eloan, and I would say it slowly. Below, a door boomed. The stranger reached up, unhurried, and pushed the hood back. Her first thought was not a loyal one. It was that the seals she pressed into wax 40 times a day did not do him justice, because a seal cannot show you how a man holds himself, as though rooms had been arranging themselves around him since he was a boy and he had stopped noticing it. A long mouth going up at one corner, gray eyes far too awake for the careless face they sat in. She noted, with a clarity she found appalling, that she would not have minded if he looked at her a while longer. She was furious about it. Havelock, he said pleasantly, as though they were being introduced at supper. Osric, the coward. The graphite slid from behind her ear and rattled away across the flagstones. Your Majesty, she said, you had more to say. I was enjoying it. There was a script for this. She should go white and take it back, the way everyone did once a king raised an eyebrow, and he was waiting for it, with the patience of a man who had watched it happen 1,000 times. Eloan did not care to be the 1,001st. I said it was a coward's device. I stand behind that. Then prove me a coward another way. He came a step closer. You have a better method. It is sitting on your face. Say it. Choose, said Aloan, aloud in the light. Cross a door you were never meant to cross, put your name to it, and let the realms see whether you have the spine to keep standing in it afterwards. Her chin came up. Prove me wrong. The bell rang 11 times. By the 11th, the gallery was a black tunnel with 22 held breaths in it and one man walking. She heard him pass the first door. The second, she counted, because counting was what she was for. He did not stop at the fourth, where Maribel's knee stood, nor the 9th, nor the 15th, and by the 22nd, she had stopped writing. He walked past her, close enough that she felt the air move, and Osric Havelock, Alpha King of Cairnmore, put his hand on the 23rd door, the one nobody counted, the one with no bar in it, and opened it, and stepped into a small grey room, with a narrow bed and a shelf of tally sticks, and stood in the middle of it looking about him with great interest. "Your Majesty," said Aloan from the doorway, in a voice she did not recognize. "That is the wrong room." "Is it? It is mine." "Yes," he said. "I know." Behind her, all along the gallery, the doors were opening. Light came out of them in yellow slabs, the whispering rose. Somebody was running for the stair, and Aloan stood there, with the ledger against her chest and the blank line waiting on it. "Then say what you mean." "What are you doing in my room?" He looked at her a moment. Then he began. "Aloan, I came here because," and got no further. Because Matron Verity Locke's voice cut the length of the gallery like a blade going into wood. "His Majesty has miscounted the doors," she said in the dark. Anyone might. The corridor filled. Protocol closed over him the way water closes over a stone, and he was carried off in it with his hand still half raised. Aloan never heard the end of the sentence. Cairnhollow decided what had happened before dawn, and it decided kindly, which was somehow the worst of it. The lamps had been hooded. The gallery had been long. The 23rd door sat past a pillar, where the flagstones changed, and a man might reasonably lose his count, especially a young man, especially a tired one, and had anyone considered that His Majesty had been 3 days in the saddle. By the time Elowen came down to the ledger halls, with her eyes gritty from not sleeping, the story had been sanded so smooth that nobody could have caught a fingernail on it. There had been an error. Errors were forgivable. The matron had said so herself, aloud in front of the entire household, which was how everyone knew it was safe to repeat. "You look terrible," said Tamsin, who had never once softened a thing in her life. "I did not sleep. No one slept." Tamsin set down an armful of tally sticks. "Pell has been sick twice." "Only once," said Pell, from behind the shelves. "The second time was nerves." The ledger halls were 3 low rooms under the south wing, where the household accounts lived, and where Elowen had spent every working day since she was 14, and where the air was cool and dry and smelled of ink and dust and mice. It was the only place in Cairnhollow that was hers. "Tell me what they are saying," she said. Tamsin and Pell looked at each other, which was answer enough. "Tamsin, they are saying he miscounted," said Tamsin. "Good. That is what I want them to say. And they are saying you knew he would." Tamsin folded her arms. "That you were the only one out in that corridor. That you had him alone in the dark before the bell for the length of 100 breaths. And that you have the seal in your apron and the run of every account in the palace. And that a quiet-blooded woman who cannot be smelled coming can stand a great deal closer to a king than anybody would ever notice." The dry air went very thin. "That is not," said Alowen. "I know it is not." Tamsin's voice cracked once and she flattened it. "I am telling you what is in the kitchens. By tonight it will be in the barracks, and the barracks will not be careful with it." Pell came out from behind the shelves with his hands full of nothing, which was what Pell did when he was frightened. "It will be all right," he said. "Once His Majesty unsays it, it will all be over in a day, and everyone will feel foolish, and by midwinter it will only be a story people tell badly at supper. That is all. He only has to unsay it." "He has until the Concord Assembly," said Tamsin. "That is 20 days. Yes, said Tamsin. Thank you, Pell. She opened the ledger. There it was, on the last page in her own small upright hand. On the night of thresholds, the 23rd door, she had written it before the corridor, finished filling because that was the discipline. You wrote what happened while it was still happening, and you did not wait to learn whether it was convenient. It would take one scrape of a blade and a little chalk to make that line say the 22nd. Nobody living would ever know. The matron had already handed the whole palace the excuse, and all Elowen had to do was let the paper agree with it. She sat looking at the line for a long moment. Then she shut the book and set the little iron weight on top of it and put both hands flat on the lid. You could, said Tamsin, who had been watching her. No, said Elowen. Nobody would. I would. She pushed the ledger away. It is the only thing in this palace I know to be true. If I start deciding when it may be true, then I am not a keeper. I am furniture with an opinion. Pell made a small, unhappy sound. Elowen sat down properly on the stool. The thing nobody in the kitchens understood, and the thing she was not going to explain to them, was that she had nothing else. She had come to Cairn Hollow at 11 years old, with a bundle and a fever, after 2 packs in the Low Country, had looked at a child with no scent, and found reasons she could not be kept. And it was Verity Locke who had come out into the yard in the rain and taken her chin in one cold hand and turned her face to the light and said, "She cannot be a daughter and she cannot be a wife, but she can certainly be useful. And useful is a great deal better than nothing. 14 years of being a great deal better than nothing." She had built her whole life inside that sentence. She could read a supply chain like other people read weather. She knew where every coin in the palace went and where 9 of them did not. And all of it, every scrap, sat on top of one arrangement, which was that the matron kept her. And in exchange she was quiet, and correct, and easy to overlook. An unmarried keeper who had been alone in a dark corridor with the king was not easy to overlook. Elowen Pell had gone very still by the door. Someone is coming down. It will be the matron. She sent for me at the 9th bell, and I did not go. It is not the matron. The ledger halls were under the south wing, at the bottom of a stair that turned twice, and nobody came down it. Stewards sent boys, boys sent other boys. In 14 years, Elowen had known the household to send exactly 4 people down that stair, and every one of them had been sent by somebody else. The footsteps on the turn above were unhurried, and they were not stopping, and they did not sound like a boy at all. The door of the ledger halls opened, and the Alpha King of Cairn Moor came into the low room, and the room changed. Elowen felt it in her teeth before she had finished standing. Tamsin went straight back against the shelves. Pell dropped to a bow so fast, his shoulder struck the doorframe, and under it all came the pressure of a true alpha filling a space with no more effort than water filling a cup. Hooded in the corridor, amused, he had let her forget what he was. He was not letting anyone forget anything now. She had called him a coward to his face. Sober, in daylight, she understood that she had been extremely stupid. "Ah," said the king, looking about him with open pleasure. "This is better. This smells like somewhere work happens." He put a hand on the corner of her desk. "Good morning. Keep her marrow, your majesty." "You did not come when the matron sent for you." "No," said Elowen. "Why not?" "Because I did not want to hear her be kind about it." He laughed. It came out of him, surprised, a real one, and behind her, Tamsin made a small sound of pure alarm. "Leave us," the king said, still smiling, and the door had not finished swinging before their footsteps were on the second turn. Then it was the 2 of them and 3,000 ledgers. "Your Majesty," said Elowen before he could speak, because she had spent the whole night building this, and, if she did not say it now, she never would. "Last night I insulted you in a public corridor, and what you did afterwards was kindly meant, or a joke, or a lesson, and it does not matter which. It was your right. But the household has decided you miscounted, and that story serves everyone in this palace, including you, so unsay it. Today, nobody will think less of you, and I will go back to my accounts, and no one need mention the thing again." The king listened to all of it with his head slightly tilted, and she had the unsettling sense that he was not only hearing the words, but weighing what each one cost her. "No," he said. Eloan's stomach dropped. "No. Whether your majesty is a coward," he said thoughtfully, "was, I believe, the point in dispute. I have 20 days to unsay the crossing, and I do not mean to use them." He drew out the second stool and sat down on it, in the ledger halls, like a man settling in. "I crossed your threshold because it was yours. I wrote as much to the council this morning, which puts it in ink in 2 places, and one of them is your own hand. That is not possible." "It is extremely possible. I watched myself do it. I am quiet-blooded." Her voice came out flat. "There is no bond in me to find. There never has been. Whatever fate or corridor or destiny you mean to hang this on, I will know it is a lie, because I am the one person in this kingdom who can be certain of it." "Yes," said Osric Havelock. "I thought you might be." And then he said the rest of it gently, and it was worse than mockery. "When they ask me, I will tell them I knew the door. Not the count, not the pillar. The door. That a man walking a dark corridor for 100 breaths can be sure of exactly one thing in it, and the one thing I was sure of was you." He turned his hand over. "Now consider what happens if I say otherwise. If I stand up at the Concord Assembly and call it an error, then the error has a name, and the name is the unwed keeper, who stood alone in that dark corridor holding the seal. They will not blame me. Kings are not blamed. They are pitied. They will blame the woman nobody can smell coming." The floor tilted very slightly. She had been thinking about it all night as a thing done to her. She had not once thought of it as a thing she could be hanged for. "So you see," he said, "we are already married in every way that matters to a rumor. The only question is whether the story is that I chose you, which is survivable, or that you contrived it, which is not." "Why?" said Eloan. "Why, what?" "Why any of it?" She kept her hands flat on the ledger to hold them still. "Until last night, you had never spoken a word to me in your life. A king does not spend 20 days and a Concord Assembly and the goodwill of every house in Kernmore on a woman he has known 100 breaths, and he does not do it out of pity. So what am I for?" The king stood. For one moment he looked almost apologetic, and it was gone before she could be sure of it. "You are wanted at the 4th of the Frost Bells," he said. "I am told the matron will want you to make an effort, and that there is a green dress somewhere in this palace nobody is using." He paused at the door. "You said you would say worse to me," and slowly. "I would like that." "I have not had a slow conversation in 3 years. Your Majesty, Osric," he said, "when there is no one on the stairs, that is not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It is not." He was halfway out when he stopped, and glanced back at her over his shoulder, and asked it lightly, the way a man asks after the weather. "Keeper Marrow, when they told you about my fall on the north stair in the spring, and how fortunate it was that the rail held, did you happen to write down who had oiled it?" Then he was gone up the stair, and the careful speech she had built all night was still sitting in her mouth, with nowhere left to go. The green dress had been made for somebody shorter, and Matron Verity Locke was pinning the hem of it with her mouth full of pins and her eyes entirely dry. "Say nothing," she said. "Answer only what is asked of you, and answer it short. When His Majesty unsays the crossing, and he will unsay it, you will thank him for his patience, and you will step back 3 paces, and you will not look up." She took a pin out of her mouth. "Turn." Eloan turned. "You have always been sensible," said Verity. "To the hem. It is the only advantage you have ever had, and tonight is the night to spend it." 14 years of that voice. Eloan had never once heard it wrong. The council sat in the frost chamber under a ceiling of painted rafters, and the families of all 22 doors sat behind them, and the crossing was to be entered in the great record or struck from it before the bells were done. Eloan stood on the flagstone. They put petitioners on. Somebody had turned every lamp in the room towards her, which she suspected was not accidental. Lord Amias Marable rose first, silver-haired and sorrowful, and spoke at length about the strain of the young king's office, and the kindness of forgetting, and the room made a low, approving noise, and Eloin counted the floor panels, and waited to be forgotten. "Before we come to it," said Osric Havelock, "I have a question for the keeper." The room settled. "Keeper Marrow, in spring, the garrison requisitioned spears. How many did they ask for?" Eloin looked up. 400, your majesty." "How many arrived?" 112. "And where did the rest go?" "To the tally of a carter who does not exist," said Eloin. "I wrote to the chancery about him twice. The chancery wrote back that the matter was in hand." "Whose hand?" "That was not stated." "Lamp oil," said the king. 2 barrels and 3 delivered since the thaw. Salt 1 and 3. Roofing lead for the West Almonry." "Delivered," said Eloin, "and then collected again 11 days later. By a man with a warrant I was not permitted to copy." The room had stopped making its low, approving noise some while ago. She heard a chair leg drag. She kept going, because she had been asked, and because she had held all of it for 4 years, in a book nobody read, and there is a particular relief in being made to say a true thing aloud in front of people who would rather you did not. Lord Marrable came to his feet. "Your Majesty, the keeper is very diligent, but a household clerk cannot be expected to grasp." "The keeper," said Osric, "has just told this council more about the state of my kingdom in the space of a minute than my chancery has told me in 3 years." He let that sit. Then he said, quite mildly, "She also told me, before she knew who I was, that I am a young man who has never made a hard decision that a chamberlain could not have made for him. I have thought about it all day. She is right, and I am not, and I would rather hear it from her than be flattered by the rest of you." "Nobody breathed so," he said. "The office of Warden of the Tithe has been vacant since my father's time. It is vacant because it is unpleasant. It carries the Crown's own seal and the right to open any storehouse, granary, counting room or ledger in Cairnmore without notice, without warrant, and without any lord's leave." He looked at her. "Keeper Marrow, take it." Eloin's ears rang. "Your Majesty, I am a clerk. You are the only person in this room who knows where my kingdom is going, which I am told is the entire duty of the office." He came down 2 of the steps. "And there is a thing about you that no warden in 400 years has had, and I would like to say it plainly in front of these men, because I do not think anyone has ever said it to you plainly at all." She wanted very badly to be somewhere else. "Every warden Cairnmore has ever sent out announces himself a mile before he arrives," said Osric. "The wind carries him. Some steward smells him coming over the hill, and the false ledger goes in the fire, and the true one under the floor, and by the time the warden is in the yard, there is nothing to find but a cup of ale, and a man who is very sorry." He held her eyes. "You cannot be smelled coming. You will arrive before your own arrival. Every man who has been stealing from me has been safe his whole life, because he could always hear the door. He will not hear you." There was a long moment in which Eloin understood that the thing she had been apologizing for since she was 11 had just been described in a room full of lords as an advantage. She could not make her voice work. She bowed instead. "The record stands as written," said Osric to the clerk of the council. "The 23rd door, enter it." And in the 2nd row, where nobody was looking, Matron Verity Locke's face did something very brief and very still, the way water goes flat before it goes over an edge, and then it was gone, and she was applauding with everyone else. Afterwards, in the passage, he caught her at the turn. "Walk with me," he said. "The North Stair. Nobody uses the North Stair after dark." "I know," said the king. "They took the lamps off the top landing in spring, and never put them back. I have been curious about it for 4 months, and tonight I have someone with me who reads a rail better than she reads a room." He was already moving. "Bring your seal, Warden." The North Stair was a stone spiral in the oldest part of Cairnhollow, 4 turns down to the yard, built narrow in a century when people expected to defend it. Eloin went first with the lamp. and had her thumb on the bracket at the top landing before they had gone 6 steps. "Well," she said, "tell me. 2 lamps burned here for years. There is soot above both brackets. The pins are gone, not broken, drawn out and taken away, and the holes filled with tallow and rubbed over with dust so a man coming up in a hurry would not notice. How long ago? The tallow has not yellowed weeks." The king said nothing at all, which she was beginning to recognize as the noise he made instead of being surprised. They went down. On the second turn, she crouched and held the lamp low over the outer edge of the tread, where 400 years of boots had worn the stone hollow, and where somebody had recently and very neatly chiseled that hollow a finger deeper. "You fell here," said Eloan. "In the spring, the rail held. It held because you had a hand on it in the dark, and you had a hand on it because you are careful on stairs." She set 2 fingers in the fresh cut. "They took the lamps off so you would be reaching. Then they gave you a place to put your foot. That is not where your foot expects to be." She looked up. "This is not an accident that happened to you. It is a room built for you to die in." "Yes," said Osric Havelock. "Just that. Yes." Not a question, not an argument, not a flicker. Eloan was still crouched with her hand on the cut stone when she heard it. Not a footstep, a breath. Below them and round the curve, one careful breath let out slowly by a man who had held it too long. She did 3 things in a second and a half, and decided on none of them. She put out the lamp. She pulled the king back against the inner wall where the spiral was tightest, because a spiral stair is the only room in the world where a man can stand 4 feet from you and see nothing. Then she stopped breathing and made him stop with her palm flat on his chest. The dark was total. Below, boots came up 1 tread and halted. She understood, with a calm that surprised her later, exactly what she had. He could not see them, he could not hear them. Because she had spent 14 years learning to move through a palace that would rather not notice her, and he could not smell her. He could smell the king. Every wolf could smell the king. So she leaned in and put her mouth by Osric's ear and breathed the word into it. Up he went. She stayed. The boots came up 2 more treads, following the only scent on the stair, and passed within a hand's width of her in the black. Eloan let him go by. Then she took the satchel strap across his back in both hands and threw all her weight backwards, down the steps. He came off his feet. He went past her, hard cracking down 4 treads with a sound she felt in her teeth, and he was up again fast, and something went through the air, where her head had been, and struck sparks off the wall. She had no blade, and no wolf, and no wish to learn what else he carried. She set her heel against the newel and hauled on the strap until something in it tore, and then there was a great deal of noise going away downwards, and a door in the yard, and nothing. Eloan sat down on the stair in the dark and shook. "You are not hurt," said the king from above her. He had come back down. Of course he had. "No. You will forgive me for saying that was remarkable. You knew." Her voice came out strange. "Nobody has died on that stair, so nobody has looked at it, and you brought down the one person in Cairn Hollow who would look, and you did not tell me what we were looking for." She got her legs under her twice now. "The stair, in the spring, and tonight, your majesty. Is somebody trying to kill you?" For half a heartbeat, something real moved behind his face. "You are shaking," he said gently. "Come inside," which was not an answer. She let him take her up, and it was only when the muniment room light came onto her hands that she saw what had come away in her fist when the strap tore. A lead tally seal, the sort tied to a grain sack so nobody can open it on the road. Stamped with a running hound. Eloan had copied that stamp into her ledger 9 times since spring. 12 of the 20 days went by, and Eloan spent them doing 2 things at once. The first was her office. She rode out to the granaries at Havermill, the salt house at Coldbrook, the counting room at Ashen Ford, arriving on foot at hours nobody expects a warden, and every time she walked in on men who had no notion she was in the building. One steward looked up from a false ledger, with a running hound seal in his hand, and went the color of tallow. She took the book, and 9 more that month, and she had never in her life been thanked by so many soldiers. The second thing was the king she was gathering, she told herself. It was the only sensible response to a man who had been walked towards his own death on a stair and said yes, about it, as though she had told him it was raining. The list did not cooperate. She would ask who had ordered the lamps taken off the north landing, and he would tell her she looked well in the mornings and terrible by noon, and how did she manage it? She would ask why he had not simply arrested somebody, and he would answer the question next to that one so smoothly that she was 3 subjects downstream before she noticed the turn. She would ask plainly what he wanted from her, and he would look at her with such open pleasure that the question fell out of her hands. He gave her nothing she could use, and a great deal she did not know where to put. Because somewhere in those 12 days, her watching him for danger had quietly become watching him. It came on like weather. On the 4th day he brought a lamp down to the ledger halls, a proper one with a broad wick, and set it on her desk and said nothing about it, and she worked by good light for the first time in 11 years, and could not look at the thing without her chest going tight. On the 7th, he found her on the muniment ladder with her arms full of rolls and stood holding the frame steady, and she came down past him slowly, 3 rungs, 4, and he did not step back, and neither did she. On the 9th she was reading out a column with ink on the side of her wrist, and he took her hand and turned it, and rubbed the mark away with his thumb, entirely absent, still arguing about Carter's. And she lost the thread of her own sentence and had to be asked twice. And on the 11th day, in the muniment room, she found the corner of a page turned down in her Coldbrook book. Eloin did not turn corners. She used a slip of linen always, because a folded corner cracks the fiber. Somebody had been in her books, and had been careful, and had made one small mistake, and she stood there with the cold going down her back, and thought, so it is not only the storehouses. She did not tell him. She wanted, for one night, to hold something back. That was the night it broke. He came down at the 11th bell. No papers, no question about the chancery. He sat on the second stool, with his elbows on his knees, 3 stories under the palace, at an hour when kings are asleep, and looked at her. "What do you want?" said Eloin. It came out raw, and she heard it come out raw, and she did not care. "Warden, no, I am at the end of it." Her hands were not steady, so she put down the pen. "Every day you will not say what you are after, and you will not leave me be, and I cannot hold both at once. Tell me, it is the office. Tell me you needed a nose that could not be smelled, and a hand that could not be bought, and I will believe you and be glad, because that at least I understand." Her voice went. "Tell me anything that makes sense. I am not built to want things I cannot have, and you are making me want." She stopped, far too late. "Want what?" said Osric, and there was nothing light in it at all. "Do not say it, you know what." She stood, because sitting had become impossible. "You have known for days. You have been enjoying it." He came round the desk unhurried, the way a person crosses a yard towards a horse that might bolt. 8 days ago you told me no wolf has ever wanted you, and you said it the way a man reads out a total. He was close now. You were right, and the reason is that our kind wants with its eyes shut. They stand in a doorway and breathe and let their blood tell them what to think. I have no scent of you to go on. I have had to do the whole thing awake. 12 days of watching you, and listening to you, and being told I am wrong in front of my own counsel, and I have wanted you on every one of them with nothing whatsoever helping me." His voice dropped. "There is not a wolf alive who has been wanted more deliberately than you have." Eloin could not breathe. "Men like you do not," she began, and it came out a whisper, and she was looking at his mouth. "You do not believe me." He did not touch her. "Then send me up that stair and I will not come down it again. I will leave you your lamp and your office and never trouble you with any of it." A pause. "Or tell me to prove it." The ledger halls were very quiet. Her pulse was extremely loud. "Prove it," said Eloin. He kissed her, and every careful thing in her head went white. There was no scent in it for her, and there never would be, and it did not matter, because there was the sound he made when her hands went into his hair. There was the exact instant his mouth stopped being careful. There was the warmth of him under her palms when she got them inside his coat, and the way his whole chest jumped, and the fact that he was shaking, this man, in a cellar, over her. She had been wanted for her figures. She had been wanted for her handwriting. She had never once stood in the path of a man's plain, helpless wanting with her own name on it. Eloan, he said, ragged. I know, she said. I am sure. And the last thing she held on to clearly was the rough sound in his throat when she said his name without the title on it, which she had never done before, and which undid him entirely. Afterwards, she lay against him, with the ledgers all round them and her ear over his heart, listening to it come down, and thought, with the last working corner of her mind, that whatever this was, it was not a scheme. Nobody schemes like that, nobody shakes. On the 19th day, High Envoy Amaris Coldwell came up the West Road, with 11 riders and a chest of frost country seals, and Cairn Hollow was scrubbed to the bone for her. Aloan stood through the reception in grey silk, with her keys at her belt, because she had refused to take them off. She had spent years in doorways at banquets counting the plate, and had no notion how to be inside one. You look as though you are pricing the curtains, said Osric at her shoulder. They are worth less than the frame. I know, I looked. He put her hand through his arm, and steered her out where every house in Cairnmore could see it done. Come and be paraded. I have waited 3 years to have something in this palace I am proud of. Heat went up her throat. That is a foolish thing to say aloud. I am famous for it. Later he took her to the orangery, where the noise thinned through glass, and the air smelled of wet earth and cold citrus. You hate this, said Eloan. Hate is strong. You are lying. She had spent 7 nights learning the shape of his laugh against her throat and the way he said her name in the dark, and she had grown good at the difference between his 2 faces. You have been charming for 4 hours and have not enjoyed a minute of it. He laughed, surprised, and the charm went out of his face like a lamp carried into another room, and what was left looked tired and much younger. My father died in the 2nd week of the frost, he said. I was 23. In the 1st month, I opened the treasury books and found 11,000 missing marks, and I understood 2 things standing there. That somebody inside this house was bleeding it, and that they had bled it comfortably for years under a clever old king, which meant they were better at this than I was. So you became a fool, said Eloan slowly. So I became a fool. He was looking at the glass. A fool is not a threat. A fool does not read granary tallies. Nobody hurries to kill a young man who waxes lyrical about his own banquets, and nobody hides anything carefully from him either. It has worked, and it has cost me every honest hour I had. His mouth twisted. Half this court believes exactly what you believed in that corridor. Not one of them would say it to my face. I said it to your face. You said it to my face, he agreed, and I have not been able to put you down since. She reached up and touched his cheek. His breath caught. Something behind his eyes gave way, and he turned his face into her palm, like a man setting down something he had carried a long way uphill. You are not what they think you are, said Eloan. You never were. And the man you are underneath it, I like him. A very great deal. He kissed her, and it came in. It came in through the place where they touched, warm and enormous and utterly foreign. Relief and fear and a tenderness so raw it made her eyes sting, and none of it was hers. And under that, deeper, in a part of her that had been shut and silent for 25 years, something lifted its head. Eloan tore herself backwards, with a sound she had never made in her life. Osric was staring at her, pupils blown wide, one hand still half raised. Did you? He began. She could feel him breathing at the other end of something. It was the room, said Eloan. It is too warm. It was nothing. The stillness that came into his face was worse than anger. Nothing, he repeated. Yes. Right. He lowered his hand. Of course. Probably nothing. But his voice had gone courteous and a long way off, and she knew that voice because it was the one he used on lords, and he had not used it on her since the frost chamber. Then, the doors opened at the far end, and the chamberlain came through with two men carrying the Concord case, and the moment was gone. The signing was for noon, and the case had to be shown to the envoy the night before and witnessed by the warden of the tithe, because the Concord is sealed in blood as well as wax. A silver pin lies in a velvet bed, each party pricks a thumb, and the mark goes into the wax beside the seal. A very old custom, and there is nothing to it. Eloan took the case and turned it to the lamp to read the wax. Then she stood very still. "Warden," said the envoy pleasantly, "is there a difficulty?" The crown seal was on the case, whole and unbroken as it should be, and set into the wax beneath it. Half hidden where the ribbon crossed was the ghost of another impression, pressed first and smoothed over a running hound. Eloan opened the case with her thumbnail. The pin lay in its velvet. Along the last quarter of it, from the point back, the silver had gone, the dull gray-brown of a thing that has been dipped and dried. She heard herself speak, as if from the next room. "Your Excellency, the pin is spoiled and not fit for use. This one I will keep on my own person, until it can be looked at properly, and I will fetch the spare from the muniment store myself, and neither of them will leave my hand before noon." The envoy looked at the pin a long moment, then at Eloan, and then, briefly, at the king. "How fortunate," she said, "that Cairnmore keeps so careful a warden." They got her out, and her people out, and then Osric had Eloan by the wrist in the passage behind the orangery. "Not a word," he said. "That was made for you." Her whole arm was shaking nightbane, or near it. "That is not a thing you use on a man. It is a thing you use on a wolf. It was in a case sealed by somebody with household keys, and it was going into your thumb at noon in front of the frost country. Not a word, not tonight." The envoy, already. The envoy will say nothing, because she has 11 riders and I have a garrison, and she would rather sign than explain. His hand closed round hers. "Eloan, if it is known before noon that somebody tried to kill me with the Concord pin, under my own roof, with the frost country in the house, there will be no Concord, and there will be men on the border inside a month. 12 hours. Give me that. And then I end it," said Osric. "Tomorrow it ends." Every part of her that had ever kept a record said no. You do not hold a true thing back to make an easy morning. But she could still feel the ghost of him against her skin, the warm foreign weight of somebody else's fear, and she heard herself say, "Until noon, you have my word." He kissed her forehead and she felt it go through her again, and then the mask came up like water closing, and he went back in to be charming. She gave him a slow count of 30. Then she followed. He did not go to his chambers. He went down the western, along the passage, past the almonry, down 2 flights, and Eloan followed on soft feet through a palace that had never once noticed her, and he did not turn round, because there was nothing to hear and nothing to smell. He went into the muniment room, her muniment room. She stood in the dark passage, with her hand flat on the cold stone, and could not make her legs work. Then she crossed to the door, and opened it. Osric Havelock was at her table, with her cold brick book open, under both hands, and every other ledger pulled forward. He looked up. For a long moment, neither of them moved. "Shut the door," he said. In 19 days Osric Havelock had never once been slow to answer her. Now he stood behind her table, with her cold brick book open under his hands, and said nothing at all. "Somebody tried to kill you tonight," said Eloan. "You told me to keep it in my mouth until noon. Then you came down here in the dark to go through my books." He shut the ledger. "Say something. I am standing here holding the door open for you." Because she was. That was the shameful part. That morning she had woken with his arm heavy across her, and she did not want this to be what it so obviously was. "I have been investigating the matron," said Osric. The words arrived as sound and refused to turn into meaning. Verity Locke. Yes, the matron of the household. Her voice came out strange. Who has run this palace since before I could read? Embezzlement. Sabotage. 4 years I can show and 9 I cannot. He spoke gently, and that was the worst of it, because it was the courteous voice, the one for frightened councilmen, and he had never used it on her before tonight. The tithe goes to House Marable, and comes back to her as a widow's portion on a marriage that never happened. The spears, the salt, the lead off the almonry roof, the running hound is her mother's housemark, and the men who came for me on that stair and with that pin were carrying her money. The floor went a long way down. No, said Elowen. He came round the table. She stepped back, and he stopped at once, which somehow made it worse. She took me in. Nobody else would. 2 packs turned me out into the road, and she came into the rain and kept me, and fed me, and taught me, and stood between me and every. She stopped. Because underneath the noise of not her, never her, something cold had begun assembling itself. You needed somebody close to her, she heard herself say. Elowen. You needed a keeper, with the household keys, and 4 years of tallies in her head, and a reason to be in the ledger halls at all hours that no man would question. Her mouth had gone numb. That is why you crossed my door. Not the 22nd, mine. A girl nobody had ever chosen for anything, would not ask hard questions about being chosen. He held her eyes, and did not deny it. Tell me I am wrong, her voice cracked. He tried to find the words, and what he did not say was that she was wrong. Elowen put both hands over her face. He had asked about the keys, who held them when she was out, which storehouses she meant to visit, and in what order. He had asked about the sign-out book twice, and she had thought he was interested in her. All of it, she whispered. The whole 19 days. Not all of it. Why not simply arrest her? She dropped her hands. You are the king. You have had 4 months, because being king does not make me able to do as I like. She holds this house, and has held it 26 years. Half the council married their wives on her advice, and there is not a servant in Cairnhollow who would take my word over hers. His steadiness frayed at the edge. If I arrest the matron on a suspicion and cannot prove it, I am a boy king who jails frightened old women. The Concord is finished, and in 3 years somebody puts a knife in me, and the realm says he had it coming. I had to have a thing. Not one man alive could argue with. It was a good answer. That was the unbearable part of it. It was a good answer, and she hated that too. You are wrong about her, she said. He picked up the cold brick book and held it out, then read it. The corner you found turned down on the 11th day, her thumb. Nobody else in this palace folds a page, and you noticed, and you did not tell me, and I have known why ever since Elowen did not take it. Verity. Locke was the one thing in her life that had never once been a lie, and if she opened that book the last floor she had would go. Not everyone is like you, she said. Some people are only what they say they are. The tears came and she let them. Is that why you never told me? Because you thought I was in it with her? No. His hand came up fast. Elowen, you are the one person in this house I was certain of before I ever spoke to you. How? Because of what you said in that corridor before you knew who was listening. His mouth twisted. You told the stranger the grain stores were empty and the garrison unpaid, and the tithe going to Marable. Nobody guilty says that in the dark, to a man he cannot see. And nobody in my court says it to me at all. She opened her mouth, and nothing came. Because she could hear it. 4 years of late evenings in the matron's room, with the accounts spread out, and that dry voice above the candle. The man at the top has not the faintest notion. A king ought to know what goes on in his own house. Do not trouble the chancery again, child. They never answer. Her words in the corridor. Verity's words first. She had carried another woman's grievance in her own mouth for years, and never once noticed it was not hers. You should have told me, said Elowen, shaking. I know. You knew I was innocent. You watched me put myself between you and a blade on that stair. I let you into my bed. And you never once told me the truth. Why not me? The answer came barely above a breath. Because I did not think you would believe me over her. He looked up. And I was right, was I not? It landed like a hand across her face. Because it was not wrong. So she reached past it to the older wound, which was closer, and had been waiting all evening. See, it said. You let yourself think you could be chosen. Now look what the choosing was for. It does not matter, said Eloan. In the frost chamber, you stood before your council and told them what I was good for, and you were the only man who ever had, and you knew the whole time that it was a use. That is not what it was. Do not. He had reached for her face, the way he had in the orangery, and she got her back against the door frame, hard enough to hurt. Do not say it now. Not when the only reason you are saying any of it is that I came through the wrong door at the wrong hour. Neither of them moved. His face was open and stricken, and she could feel him at the other end of the thread she had told him was nothing. She turned to go. Eloan, his voice went. Please. There is a poisoner in this house, and a foreign envoy under the roof. And he caught himself and made it better. I need you tomorrow, and there it was. Not I am sorry, not I cannot lose you. Good night, your majesty, said Eloan, and she went out into the dark of the passage. Verity Locke was standing 10 paces down the passage, in the dark, with her hands folded, and she had not brought a lamp. Child, she said. And because it hurt too much to carry one step further, Eloan went to her. He never chose me. It came out in pieces. He wanted the keys. He wanted the books. It was the office all along. I know. Verity's hands came down on her shoulders, cool and certain, the way they had come down in a wet yard 14 years ago. I hoped to spare you it. I told you long ago what you were for, and I told you because knowing is a kindness. Being useful is not a small thing. It is simply not the other thing. Eloan stood there and let herself be held and thought. Everyone knew. The whole palace knew. Everyone but me. There is worse, said Verity. There cannot be worse. There is, and you will hear it from me, rather than from the frost country in the morning. A breath, perfectly measured. The concord pin was spoiled. Eloan went rigid. I know because I saw who spoiled it. I came down to the muniment store at the 9th bell, and the King of Cairnmore was standing at your table with the case open and a file in his hand, and he sealed it up again himself and carried it out past me. The passage was very cold. Why? Said Eloan. Because the guest pricks her thumb before the host, her seal goes into the wax first, child, and it has been so for 200 years. Verity's voice never rose. He means her to die, on Cairnmore's own pin, blame the Frosthouses for it, and take the border holdings in the morning. He has debts no one has seen, and a young man with debts and a charming face will do almost anything if he can be sure of being pitied afterwards. Eloan did not move. She hoped she did not move. Because the pin had not been in the muniment store at the 9th bell, she had signed it out herself at the 8th, into the chamberlain's hands, in front of 2 clerks, and written the hour in the book in her own script. The case had gone up to the reception, and had never come back down. At the 9th bell, she and Osric Havelock had been standing in the orangery under glass, and she had had her hand on his face. Verity, Locke had just described, with great care and in the correct order, a thing that could not have happened. Something went out of Eloan then, and did not come back. Not grief. Grief came later and stayed for years. This was the small, clean sound of a bolt going across. He had been telling the truth, all of it. The tithe, the stare, the men carrying her money, her hand wanted her keys, and she did not let it move. Not here, one woman alone in a passage with the matron of the household and every servant in Cairnhollow, between them and the door. What do we do? Said Eloan, and she let her face fall apart, which cost her nothing, because most of it was falling apart anyway. Verity's eyes sharpened with satisfaction. We go to the envoy tonight, before he can dress it up. A king. who would murder a guest under his own roof, cannot be allowed to sign anything. He will fall by morning. And there are good old houses ready to study the realm when he does. A pause. But it cannot come from me. I am a servant, and they will say I am reaching above myself. Her voice went soft and almost kind. It has to come from you, from me, from the woman he crossed the corridor for, from the warden who opened the case with her own hands. Verity took Eloan's face between her palms. You will tell Her Excellency what you saw. Nobody in that room will doubt a word of it. 14 years, thought Eloan, and this is what I was being kept for. Not the ledgers. This one clean witness, quiet-blooded, grateful, nobody's daughter, standing up at the exact right hour to say a thing that would be believed. Yes, matron, she said. They walked, and it was the longest walk of her life. She had no book, no witness, no warrant, and no wolf. She had a sign-out entry 3 floors below in her own hand, and a lie about the 9th bell, and she had to turn a trap inside out, with her voice alone, in front of a foreign power. One wrong word, and there would be men on the border inside a month, and it would be her word that put them there. The envoy had taken the long council room in the east wing. Guards at the door, frost country riders along the wall, a fire built too high, and amorous Coldwell, at the head of the table with the Concord unsigned in front of her. Osric was there. He looked up when the door opened, and for half a heartbeat, his whole face lit like a window. Then he saw who had come in behind her, and it went out. Your Excellency, said Verity Locke, and she bowed very low. It grieves me beyond words to bring you this, but you have been wronged tonight by the man on your right hand. She laid it out, the file, the 9th bell, the guest's thumb before the host's. That is a lie, said Osric. Every word of it is hers. He would say so, said Verity gently. Of course he would, but the king's own intended was in the muniment store tonight. She opened the case, she saw the seal. And she turned, and the whole room turned with her, to the silent woman by the door. Warden Marrow. Tell Her Excellency whose hand sealed that case. Every face came round to her, the envoy leaning forward. The Frost Riders? Lord Amias Marrable, at the far end, who had not been sent for and had come anyway. Verity, Locke, with her hand held out, already counting it done. And Osric, who thought she had come to bury him. I should have believed you, she told him, with nothing at all. Then she turned to the head of the table. I saw nothing of the sort, she said, because it did not happen. The matron of the household is lying to you, and I can show you how. The room went tight as a drawn string. Child, said Verity, the matron says the case was opened in the muniment store at the 9th bell. It was not. I signed it out at the 8th into the chamberlain's hands with 2 clerks standing by, and I wrote the hour in the sign-out book in my own script. The book is 3 floors below this room, and it has not left my keeping. Send for it. It will not have changed its mind. Somebody at the wall shifted his feet, and at the 9th bell His Majesty was in the orangery with me. The chamberlain and 2 clerks came in upon us there, and can say so, and 40 people in the long room watched him walk out to it. She is besotted, said Verity to the envoy sorrowfully. She would say anything. Then here is a thing that does not need me at all. Eloan put her hand into her apron and set the spoiled pin on the table, point towards the fire, where every soul in the room could see the dull gray-brown along the last quarter of it. That is the Concord pin. I drew it, I witnessed it, and I have kept it on my person since. And that, she turned the case and put her thumbnail under the ribbon, is the crown seal over the top of another impression that was pressed first and smoothed, a running hound, her mother's house. The silence had a bottom to it. There had been 3 attempts on the king's life since the thaw, a stair with its lamps drawn off, and its tread cut. A man on that same stair 18 nights ago who left behind a lead tally seal, running hound, which I have copied into my books 9 times since spring on grain sacks that never reached the garrison. And this. She looked at Amaris Coldwell. Your Excellency, I hold the crown's seal, and I ask you to have the matron's rooms and Lord Marrable's baggage opened this hour, while they are standing in front of you and cannot reach them. If I am wrong, you will find linen and letters, and I will lay down the office in the morning. If I am right, you will find a file and a paymaster's book. This is hysteria, said Verity. Then a search costs you nothing, said the envoy quietly, and she raised 2 fingers to her riders. Verity Locke's face changed. The grave, tired, honest woman went out of it all at once, like a candle carried out of a room, and what was left was neither grave nor tired at all. She has no wolf, said Verity. The room stopped. Look at her. The voice was still perfectly level, and that was the horror of it. 25 years old, and nothing has ever risen in her. She cannot be smelled. She cannot be read. There is no blood in her to swear on, and no beast in her to hold her to a word, and you are taking the testimony of a hollow girl I fed out of my own hand because nobody else in this kingdom would have her under a roof. She turned to the envoy. She is not a witness, Excellency. She is a tool. She has been mine since she was 11. Tonight she is his, and tomorrow she will belong to whoever puts a hand out to her, because there is nothing in the middle of her to be loyal with. Nobody spoke. Aloan stood in the firelight, with her keys at her belt, and heard 14 years of a voice. She had trusted with everything, and understood that this was what it had been saying underneath the whole time. Every kindness, every lesson. Useful is a great deal better than nothing. You may be right, said Aloan, but the sign-out book is not hollow, and it will be here in a moment. Verity moved. She was 61 years old and faster than anybody expected, because nobody in that room had ever thought of her as a thing that could move. And she did not go for the door, and she did not go for Eloin. She went for the pin on the table, and then she went for the king. Eloin did not decide anything. There was no time to decide. She got across the corner of the table and put herself in the line of it with her arm up, the way you would put up an arm against a thrown stone, and something went into her forearm below the elbow with a small, neat sting, hardly anything at all, less than a needle. Then there was a great deal of noise. Frost riders came off the wall. Marrable was shouting about his baggage. Somebody had Verity Locke face down across the table, with her cheek against the unsigned concord, and she was not struggling, she was talking, still explaining, and somebody else was pulling Eloan backwards by the shoulders. Get it out, Osric was saying. His hands were on her arm, and they were not steady at all. Get it out! Get it out! The pin came free. It had gone in perhaps a finger's width. Loan looked at the small dark bead coming up out of her own skin, and had time to think, quite clearly, that she had done the arithmetic on this poison 11 hours ago in a lamplit room. Nightbane does not kill a man. It goes into the blood of a wolf, and it stops the wolf, and then it stops everything else. Her arm had already gone cold to the wrist. Eloan, said Osric. Send for the book, she said. Tell them to bring the book. And then the floor came up. She woke 2 days later in a room with too many windows, and the first thing she saw was the king of all the land asleep in a chair with his boots on. The physicians had a great deal to say afterwards, and all of it came to one sentence. Nightbane is made to break a wolf. It goes into the blood, finds the beast, stops it, and everything else follows the beast down. In Eloan Marrow it had gone in and found nothing to break. It made her cold to the shoulder and made her sleep 2 days, and then it ran out of things to do and gave up. She lay looking at the ceiling a long while. The thing she had apologized for since she was 11. The thing Verity Locke had named in a council room to strip her of her word. It was the reason she was still breathing. You are awake, said Osric. You have not shaved. No. He stopped short of the bed, and she watched him decide not to touch her. They opened her rooms, the file, the paymaster's book, 9 years of it in her own hand. The envoy signed the concord at noon, and put her name under yours as witness. His voice was not steady. You saved my life. I did my office. Eloan, I came into that room to stop a liar. That is all it was. She turned her head on the pillow so she did not have to look at him. You looked me in the face for 19 days, and used me, and I nearly died in a room full of people who had to be told by a book whether I was worth believing. A true thing done at the end does not undo it. I know the thread, he said quietly. In the orangery, it is real, and you felt it, and I felt you feel it. It does not matter whether it is real, said Eloan. She heard him not argue. I am glad you are alive, she said. You will be a good king. You always would have been, once you stopped pretending not to be a beat. But I do not trust you, and I do not know that I ever will again, and I am too tired to be kind about it. She heard the chair scrape and the door, and then nothing, and she did not cry until she was quite sure the corridor was empty. 5 months went by. She was warden of the tithe in fact as well as name, and extremely good at it. The garrison was paid in full by midsummer, for the first time since his father's day. Verity Locke sat in a cell under the old fort, and would sit there for the rest of her life. The rot she had grown into the household was cut out, root and branch, and the city had begun, slowly and suspiciously, to love the young king who had done it. He had also spent every one of those 5 months trying to get her back. The flowers came in the second week, and Eloan came off a dawn ride, to find the whole yard of the ledger halls full of them and Pell grinning like a fool. The infirmary, said Eloan, and the temple, and tell His Majesty, the West Almonry roof, still wants lead. He tried the council next. She sat at the long table twice a week now, and he was always across it, and his whole face would do something hopeful and uncertain, and she would look down at the tithe returns. Afterwards he would find a reason to be near the door. Warden, might I have a moment? She walked out anyway. The thread did not help. Leave a thread open, and it deepens, and deepen it, and it sets. So she kept it shut with both hands, and waited for it to wither and let her go. Meanwhile, he wrote 2 and 3 letters a week, in his own hand, on ordinary paper. Some were 4 lines, some ran for pages. Some were not about her at all, a posting, a pension dispute, a question about Carter's, as though her plain opinion were still worth asking for. One said, I have written the word, sorry, 90 ways now, and it is a small stupid word for what I did, and I have no bigger one, so I will keep sending the small one. One said, you told me I was close enough to be led into your bed, and not close enough to be told the truth. You were right. I did not earn your trust. I spent it. One held nothing but a single line copied out very carefully in a hand that was not his, and she knew the hand at once, because it was hers. It came out of the Havermill book from 4 years ago, a small, dry protest, in her own margin, beside a tally that would not add up. Ask twice. No reply. This is not true. Under it he had written only, I have known you longer than you think. He did not explain himself, and she sat with that letter in her lap for an hour, and got no further with it. Tamsin and Pell had opinions. Good, said Tamsin in the early weeks. Let him sweat. You owe that man nothing. By the 3rd month, the line had moved. He sorted the back pay, Pell said one evening. And he has written you? 63, said Tamsin, who apparently counted. By the 5th they had given up subtlety. Warden, with respect, talk to the man. There is nothing to talk about. You are miserable. He is miserable. And the rest of us have to watch the 2 of you being miserable in the same building. Eloan put down her pen. I was used. I am not queuing up for a second turn. The tithe runs well, and the garrison is paid. Leave me be to do my work. And then, in the 6th month, a letter came that was different. Eloan, I am sorry. You deserved better than you got from me, and I have no way left to say it that I have not used already. You have been clear, and I have not been listening, and that is one more thing I have taken from you without asking. I will stop now. She read it twice. This was what she had asked for, in a room with too many windows and in every corridor since. So why did it sit in her chest like something being lost? He kept his word. No more letters, no flowers. When she passed him on the stairs, he would nod and say, "Warden, courteous, not cold, never cold, just finished." This is what you wanted, she told herself. She did her work, and she did it well, and every night the warm, patient thread under her ribs stayed exactly where it was and would not fade. Then came the knock. Pell came into her office with Tamsin at his shoulder, both of them the gray color of people who have made a very large mistake. "What?" said Elowen slowly. "Have you done?" "He is gone," said Tamsin. "The king." Not in his chambers, not the council room, not anywhere. Nobody has seen him since the 10th bell. Elowen was on her feet without deciding to be. His horse, in the stall, his sword on the stand, nothing taken. The room is neat, and it is empty. 3 attempts, a stair, a man on it, a pin, and a woman in a cell who had held this house 26 years and would have friends in it, still. "Wake the trackers," said Elowen, pulling on her coat. Quietly. No bells. Every gate, the postern, the river steps. "If this gets out, we will have a panic by dawn." They went, and she stood alone, with her hands shaking, and understood there was one instrument in the world that would find him faster than a tracker. She had been starving it for 5 months. "It is duty," she told herself, palm flat on her own chest. "He is the king. Finding him is my office." It had never been only that, and she was too frightened to keep pretending otherwise. She opened the thread. It came through like a door blown off its latch. Tiredness first, so deep it had gone quiet. Then sorrow, patient and worn smooth, the twin of what she had carried since the room with too many windows. Then, underneath both, a small, stubborn, ridiculous determination, the feeling of a man doing a job badly and refusing to stop, not frightened, not dying, and it was pulling her south. Elowen was running before she finished the thought, down the west turn, up 2 flights, along the almonry passage, into the one corridor in Cairn Hollow she had not walked in 5 months. The long gallery was dark, and 22 doors were shut, and at the far end, past the pillar where the flagstones changed, the 23rd stood open with a light in it. She went the last of it slowly. There was no body, and there was no blood. There was the King of Cairnmore sitting on the floor of a small grey room, with his coat off and his sleeves shoved, up a chisel in one hand, a brass door-bar across his knees, and wood shavings everywhere. The frame beside him had been cut into 4 times at 4 different heights, none of them level, and the last attempt had split the grain from the mortise, clean down to the hinge. He looked up. "Do not say anything." Elowen opened her mouth, and nothing came out of it. "It is a socket. You cut a socket in the jamb and the bar drops into it. There are children in the lower city who can do this." He turned the chisel over and considered it with real loathing. "Nobody teaches a king joinery. I asked a carpenter, and he offered to do it for me, and I said no, and I have thought about that a good deal since, because I could not tell him why not. You have been coming here since the frost most nights. I asked the guard on this corridor not to tell you, and I am afraid you have very loyal men." Elowen looked at the ruined frame and at his hands, which were a mess. "Why?" she said. He set the chisel down. "Because I stood in this doorway on the worst night of my life and understood that it had never had a bar in it, because in 14 years nobody had imagined a reason to fit one." He was not looking at her, and I could not get past it. "That there was a door in my own house with nothing to hold it shut, because nobody had ever thought there was anything inside worth shutting a door on." Her eyes had gone hot. "So I thought I would put a bar on it, so that the next time anybody comes down this corridor in the dark and puts a hand on this door, you can shut it in his face, including me, especially me." He rubbed sawdust off his palm. "I wanted there to be one thing in this palace that was yours to shut. And then I ruined your door frame. And I have been coming back to fix what I broke the night before, and it has gone on for 5 months. And I would rather you had not seen it. Eloan sat down on the floor across from him, because her legs had stopped being interested in the alternative. You said you would stop, she said. I said I would stop writing. I did. A pause. I did not promise to stop entirely. That would have been a lie. And I have told you enough of those. Do you know what you have done? Her voice cracked wide open. I thought you were dead. I thought somebody had finally got you, and the only way I had to know was the one thing I have spent 5 months trying to strangle. And I had to open it. And now I cannot. She stopped. Osric put the brass bar carefully down on the boards. No, you could not, and you will not be able to, and that is what has frightened you all along. He leaned forward. On the night of thresholds, you told a stranger in the dark that a man who lets a hallway do his choosing for him is a coward. You were right. His voice went quiet. And you have spent 5 months letting the thing you are most afraid of do your choosing for you, because that way you never have to say a word aloud and be wrong twice. The silence in the little room was total. Say that again, said Eloan. You are a coward, said the king of Cairnmore. Prove me wrong. She was crying and she did not care. That is my line. It is a very good line. I have thought about it every day for 6 months. He came up onto his knees, level with her, and there was nothing charming left in his face. Everyone in this kingdom says I walked into the wrong chamber. My council says it. Half the servants still say it kindly, when they think I cannot hear. He held her eyes. Let me stay in it. Not for a night, for all of them. I do not want the office, or your keys, or a witness. I want the woman who told me the truth, in the dark when she did not know who was listening, and I will keep coming down here with this useless chisel until you tell me to go. Eloan looked at the frame he had wrecked 4 times, and at his hands. Finish the door, she said. He blinked. What? Finish it. Properly, or as properly as you can manage, which I accept may not be very... She got up, put out her hand, pulled him to his feet, and did not let go. Then ask me again, and you will say yes. Ask me, said Eloan, and find out. It took him 11 days, and it was the ugliest piece of joinery in Cairnmore, and it worked. She said yes on an ordinary morning in the ledger halls, with ink on her wrist and a tithe return half copied before he had even asked to get in first. The whole city came out for it. The boy king nobody had taken seriously, and the quiet-blooded clerk who had seen the man behind the performance before anybody else bothered to look. He cried during the vows. She had known he would. She did not, quite, but the thread gave her away and he laughed at her through his own tears. It was that night, much later, that he told her the last of it. I never miscounted, said Osric. Eloan lifted her head. 4 years of household books came up to me in the second winter, and there was a hand in the margins of all of them. Small, very dry. Asked twice. No reply. This is not true. Somebody put in against Marable 9 times, got nothing back 9 times, and wrote it down anyway. He was watching the ceiling. I read 2 years of it before I thought to ask whose hand it was. And on the night of thresholds, I walked that corridor in the dark and counted every door, and I counted 22 of them on purpose. She could not speak. Everyone thought I entered the wrong chamber, he said. I had been trying to get into it for 2 years. You let them all believe you had made a mistake. I let them believe I was a fool, said the king of Cairnmore. It is the only lie I have ever been glad of. Nobody guards a door against a man who cannot count.